Hi, and welcome to the Relentless Marketing and PR Podcast. With me, as always, is Katie Atkinson.
And with me, as always, is Lauren Reed. We're two marketers and entrepreneurs, and we're here to share our philosophy on figuring it out, moving forward, and never giving in.
And we're here today with Dr. Teri Murphy. You are a psychologist, got that right?
Licensed marriage and family therapist and PhD in counselor education supervision.
Awesome. And former rocket scientist in Air Force?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So how does that all?
I know, it's a weird, strange trip, but to me, they're really similar. I worked in really more of an engineering sort of position, which was really finding the blocks to things. So if things weren't working, we had to go in and try and find systematically how to make things better, look into the future and try and predict that. I feel like therapy is really similar to that in a lot of ways. Like what's the blocks between people, what's not working, what needs to actually be shifted and changed, and then can we predict in the future what people are going to need, the tools that they're going to need to be better. So it feels really similar. It's like worlds apart, but it feels really similar to me.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, very. So, sorry, just to geek out a little bit for a second. So, rocket scientist and engineer and Air Force. So, were you like wanted to be an astronaut, like NASA kind of?
Oh, I want to be an astronaut.
I mean, I would rather be thrown from a mountain onto something sharp than go into space.
Oh my
to be
God.
honest, I can't even imagine. So I like the idea of helping with things in space. I don't want to personally throw my body
I
out
want
there.
to go to space.
Okay. Yeah.
It is seriously on my bucket list.
That would be fun. Send me a postcard.
I want to go to
there.
space. And my husband is not. Yeah, Richard's not cool with
I'm
that.
not either.
I mean, I've told him, like, as soon as, I think it's like $250,000 right now. I'm like, when it drops to like 40 grand or below, surely I'll still be alive.
Yeah.
I'm getting on that rocket.
Commuter spaceship.
Yes.
Head
Just
on up.
do a little rotation, come on back down. Yeah.
Well, you probably know
fun.
a lot more behind the scenes of what's involved in that.
Yeah.
Might
I'm probably not going to make it to space.
be a little scary for you.
It's not helpful sometimes to know a lot about things
that's
like
what I was
that. The
thinking.
margin of error is pretty slim. Yeah.
Yes. That's interesting. So I love how you talked about your paths and how they actually do all tie together.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of why we have you here today is we're in the public relations and marketing industry. But really the reason I personally do what I do is because I love figuring out what drives people to take action and the psychology behind it. And what, let's say, what causes you to buy this product versus that one, and really get in someone's head and figure out what they're looking for and what they understand.
Yeah.
That's what I love about my industry. Edward Bernays, who is known as the godfather of public relations, I just got done teaching a college course at Lipscomb University, a PR 101 course, which I have not gone through since I took it when I was 18. So it was this great refresher. But I learned, and I don't know how I hadn't known this, that his uncle.
Yeah, his uncle was Sigmund Freud.
It's Sigmund Freud. And he took a lot of his learnings into his work. So really, the field of public relations was very much influenced by Sigmund Freud in psychology. And once I made that connection, I think that's when I emailed you and was like, we have to talk about this on our podcast.
Yeah.
Because it just blew my mind.
Do people need to be more aware of the psychology behind what they're doing? I think sometimes we just go through life and
I think
don't
you're
realize.
totally right about that. I think it's really interesting to think about why people do what they do. You're talking about this and even really thinking about moving through life. I think a lot of people go and even maybe buy something, get involved in different activities and stuff. And if you were to say, why did you do that? They may give you an answer. But if you really sit with someone and start to understand a bit more about how they work and really why they're doing what they're doing, it's usually a little bit far off, right? I wonder if maybe you guys experience that in PR. People think they want a thing, but when you really sit with them and explore, other stuff starts to pop open.
Absolutely. That happens all the time. And I think our listeners will probably experience that as well, whether they're agency or client side. It's someone comes to you, whether it's your boss or another department, or in our case, a client, and says, I need XYZ. And you look at them and there's a disconnect. So you have to step backwards. Why do you think you need that? Or what do you hope to accomplish with XYZ? And then they say that, and we're like, okay, glad we got this out, because there's 5 other ways that are more impactful to get you there.
Yeah.
And so we work backwards with our clients.
Yeah, I think the why is the really important part there, and you're in end goal, your end business goal. And sometimes we are so quick to move to the tactic and think we know what it is and without identifying the goal or the emotion or whatever it might be behind it.
Yeah, that's what I do all day. That's really what therapy is. That's what we're really studying in psychology is people come in and say, I want to fix my communication problems with my partner. Right. And so that's the end goal. But then when you really look at it, so how do you want to get there? Well, if they would just, right, everyone comes in and it's like, if my partner would just do this, then we would be fine. Right. It's like, if you guys would just give me this information about this connection I need to make, then my business problems will go away. Everything will be fine. If you'll just do this thing I'm asking you to do. Because for some reason, and we don't know yet, for some reason, there's some sort of story that's been attached to outcomes they've seen in other places. Right. And there's an assumption there usually about how that happens without really kind of knowing. Right. Right. And my guess would be you guys probably sit with people then and help them understand a little bit more about what they really want, why they want it. And then you get to help them find some different options about how to get there.
And with them, it's what they want, yes, but it's more so what their audience wants.
Yeah.
So they come to us because we can really whittle down and figure out what their audience wants and then how their audience receives information.
But there's a disconnect there too between what they think that their audience wants and what their audience really wants.
There's always too, more and more, there's generational disconnects. Yeah. So I'm a millennial running a team of millennials. Most of our clients with Gen X, Boomer, the millennial generation is increasingly becoming our clients, but they're not always the decision makers yet. Yeah. So we're always having to present information in a way and educate different generations on how.
Or other diverse perspectives. I mean, it could be.
Yeah, it's not just generational.
Let's face it, a lot of companies are run by men and they're trying to market to women. Well, how does this man understand how to market this beauty product to 35-year-old women? You know, things like that.
I just saw a commercial the other day that was showing women like in the workplace, like achieving and overcoming. They're like, you can do this in a man's world. And I was like, oh,
it is not a man's world, it is our world.
That's the problem.
And side note, we're sitting here in the Hermitage Hotel, which had just played a major role in the women's suffrage movement. And we're coming up on the 100th?
It's the 100th.
100th anniversary is actually in August, I believe. August? Am I getting that wrong?
I think so.
I think it's August.
August or September.
We're right across the street from the courthouse. And this is where I'm going to say it wrong, the suffragettes actually would stay and hang out. And they had a huge party here the night that women got the right to vote right here in Tennessee.
Love it.
So I think it's really cool that we're sitting here today.
And speaking of that, so the Godfather, is he the father or the Godfather?
Maybe I just say Godfather.
It's a little gangster.
I'm a very gangster guy.
He's just the father.
When I taught this class, I did not call him the Godfather. I probably did. There was all these Lipscomb PR students walking around talking about the Godfather of the PR.
So anyway, the father of public relations. Oh my gosh. Edward Bernays.
Cut all that out.
I think it's great, actually. But the father of public relations, he sort of had a campaign that, one of his founding campaigns that tied to the women's suffrage movement that was called the Torches of Freedom. Is that right, Lauren?
Torches of Freedom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Professor Lauren.
Professor Reed. I know, I always cracked up when my students would call me professor or doctor. It's like, I didn't earn any of that. I just own a PR agency.
But, so women were smoking in the back alleyway because it was seen as like uncouth for women to smoke. Yeah. And so Bernays somehow got into their minds and thought, oh, well, we'll just make the cigarettes smaller and skinnier and cooler, and we'll get women who are really strong, cool women to carry these torches of freedom.
Torches of freedom, socialites and debutantes and things like that. And they tied it to women's rights, the women's movement of men can do this, I can do this. And they made smoking cigarettes, smoking tobacco, which I am so like, is this brilliant or is it so wrong?
Right.
But they made it just really cool. It's both. And we will side note that this was before everybody knew the
health hazards.
Of tobacco.
Yeah.
And I think in the 60s and 70s, Edward Bernays actually worked against big tobacco to ease his guilt. So
he said it was his biggest regret, I think.
His biggest regret. But just looking at it goes back to the psychology behind PR and marketing. Big Tobacco needs to sell cigarettes. They go to someone like Edward Bernays, who then really looks at what drives people to take action, what motivates them. And he looked at what was going on. And in the women's movement at the time, he thought, he connected, this is a social issue that's going on, but this is a product we need to sell. And bang, like it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think when we talk a lot about this on all of our episodes about having ethics and a code of ethics and standards. And I think one thing Bernays maybe didn't do a lot of is really getting to the heart of what the company is about and what they're doing, and if it's beneficial for the public or the audience that they're going after. So the definition of PR, Lauren has said this multiple times, is the communications.
Dr. Reed here. The communications between, the
management
function between an organization and its public, and its audiences.
Yeah.
So it's how you communicate. It's
mutually beneficial.
They actually took that out.
Oh, well, it should be.
It should always be mutually beneficial, but that's like your point.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting to.
Is mutually beneficial.
Right.
But I'm wondering though, was that just a sign of the times? Because right now everyone wants to know who they're buying from, what they stand for, who they're working for. In 1922, was that the case?
Yeah. No, I think people have become more enlightened, right? Yeah. And this goes back to psychology and the things that we're doing with the Enneagram and all of those things too. We know a lot more these days. So we're going to ask those questions as consumers too.
Well, even in the field of psychology, we didn't even have ethics boards or anything until like 40, 50 years ago. Like it just didn't exist. So one of the things I was thinking about on the way here when I used to teach gen psychology is, do you guys remember Watson and Skinner, if you ever had like a general psychology class, the behavioral therapists? So this is a long time ago, after Freud, and moving away from this idea that people are unconsciously unaware of what drives them. They were like, none of that matters. You can actually make anybody do anything if you can just program them to do it. And so, yes, one of the things that Watson...
So my son can brush his teeth.
Yeah.
I just need to learn how to program him to do so.
So what Watson would say is if you could scare him enough, threaten him enough, you can actually get him to do anything. So there's no ethical sort of place there for that. But that is what they did. And they did this with children, and they did this with dogs. If you shock a dog enough and put him in a box, Skinner would talk about this, that even if every time he got out, you shock him. Right? If you, I know this is like taking a really dark turn. It's taking a dark turn.
Sad, and I want to hug my puppy.
I know. Well, they did it to babies too, but in a different way. I know. But if you shock a dog enough when he's trying to leave, even if you leave the cage open after time, turn the shocks off, he won't leave. And then even if you sit him out in the open, he won't go anywhere. And we learned helplessness in that way. Like if you induce enough fear in people, you can make them do anything. And you still see it in a lot of advertising today. Like you're going to be left out. You're going to be the one that's different. You're going to be the one that doesn't belong. You're going to be the one that's not included unless you buy our product, do our thing, join our group, whatever it is. So that part still very much is all in our culture. It's all definitely part of it. And that came out of Watson's research in psychology, which was never would meet ethical standards.
No.
Like the way that we do research now and the way that we really think about clients, we don't even call them patients anymore because we're not doing things to people. It's that
like
exact interaction. It's a relationship now.
Relationship.
It's a therapeutic relationship, but now we have guidelines around why we're supposed to do what we do. Like knowing the motivation behind people doesn't mean we can do whatever we want to them.
Right.
You know, but it does help us know how to help them. Like it still does matter. It's still useful information to understand people. Where are you coming from? What's your story? Even when you were talking about the different generations, I was thinking the psychology is totally different. Someone who grew up in a Gen X generation than someone who was a boomer.
Right.
What matters to them, they were afraid of, what belonging really meant, you know, what gender norms were, you know, even differences in abilities and neurodiversity, like all of that stuff is so new conversations, new things. It existed before, but we didn't talk about it in any kind of bigger way. So it's not part of the culture in the same way.
I'm curious if you have seen just anything in your practice with because I think about this campaign, and it was truly the original influencer campaign, right?
Yeah.
It was influencer marketing.
Yeah,
They
and
went
it
on
worked.
Instagram.
It totally worked. Yeah.
I mean, it was on the front page of the paper, all of that.
Yeah.
But now that influencers, I'm air quoting for those of you who are listening, not watching.
Yeah.
I have to be careful what we say because we do influencer marketing and
Just say it and we can cut it out.
make money doing it. Okay, yeah, if this is wrong, cut it out, Todd. It makes people feel bad sometimes, right? Like this,
Like the
perfectly
Instagram
Instagrammed
world.
life.
It does.
Of I'm this influencer, I'm a mommy influencer, and I'm just, my house is so clean, look at it. And like my baby, like her hair's never messed up.
Well, and even when you try to be imperfect, even when they're like, oh,
They're
I'm
imperfectly
they're
perfect.
perfect. Yes.
Yeah. Humble brag.
So,
Yes.
yeah, with influencer marketing and the rise of influencers, both online and not, have you seen a change in society and how people feel?
A lot of people will come into my office and talk about it too. Just this sort of, we know that there's a correlation between social media and depression. We already know that that's a fact. We've seen a lot of research on that because a lot of what we see on social media is so very different than people's day-to-day lives. Like, I don't know if you've ever done this, been like sitting in some laundry, you know, having just fought with your partner, and then you're looking at social media and it's like, look at that. They're kissing each other while they're in Fiji, you know, and all of this kind of stuff. And so it induces that kind of longing, you know, that happens for a lot of people. But the problem is you don't really get to see all the behind the scenes.
Yep.
And then, you know, even the behind the scenes is like, oh, look at this little mess. And it's like 2 dishes beautifully positioned with some like dish liquid or whatnot. And people are so out of sync with what real life feels like.
It's
That's
like
what I hear.
they clean up and make a fake mess for the Instagram feed.
Exactly.
It's like a fake mess.
It
It's
is.
not really a mess.
And we feel it, right? So it doesn't resonate. There's something that feels a little off, but instead of going, that's fake, it feels like I'm not measuring up exactly in some sort of way.
So then I look back to, let's say, 1920s when this was all going on and women are seeing, I mean, because I imagine the things we experience now in 2019, 2020, it happened back then. I mean, you compared yourself to your neighbors just in a different way about different things.
It just wasn't in your hand
in your face
all day
the
long.
time.
Yep.
But there's always going to be relationships and feeling like you're not enough and this and that. So when these women were seeing, you know, debutantes and socialites and
Smoking
high society,
cigarettes and-
smoking cigarettes,
look
this
cool.
torch of freedom.
Yeah.
No wonder they did it. Like, it makes so much sense to me why this campaign worked.
Well, and then it was highly addictive, so then they continued
And then
to
it's
do it.
highly addictive. So they continued to do it, and Big Tobacco made a whole lot of money.
Yeah. So going back to the whole ethics thing around this, I'm thinking about, so Bernays had another campaign and it was for soap. And so kids had dirty faces and they cried every time. I know, it's like, kids, your kid has a dirty face, make them wash their face. But they cried all the time because they got soap in their eyes. So they didn't want to wash their faces.
Yeah.
And so he came up with this brilliant plan and he integrated soap sculptures into all these school programs so that the kids had a fun experience with soap.
Positive experience.
So all these kids have clean faces and they're all using soap. And Johnson & Johnson or whoever it was made lots of money on it.
Yeah.
So my question is, thinking about ethics and the psychology behind it, we're using the same tools, but it's beneficial for them. So is it ethical?
Oh, I love this question.
I mean, I hope the answer is yes, because it's what I've built my career on.
Well, I think the same thing could be said about therapy. Like, if I'm really helping people to make these changes in their lives, sometimes what happens in couples therapies, people end up splitting up.
Right.
So, like, what are the ethics of marriage counseling? I used to think the whole goal was to keep people together.
Right.
Like, isn't that our job? Like, a football coach is supposed to win games. Like, isn't a therapist supposed to try and
Win a marriage.
Exactly. I got to win that marriage.
Yeah.
Right. And so, no. Like, sometimes what happens at the end of the day when we help people and they really are free to make their own decisions, sometimes that ends in a positive way. And sometimes what it would look like from the outside is maybe it wasn't what you thought that it was going to be. And I don't know. I think ethically thinking about that kind of stuff, knowing people's insides, what motivates them is not inherently wrong. It's information.
Yeah.
Right.
And if it's ultimately their choice and there's consent around that, you know, and you're doing things for the positive, I mean, I don't see the dilemma in that.
I mean, I don't either.
I think it goes back to, I mean, our industry has a code of ethics.
Yep.
And it's what we follow. If you work at our agency, you sign off on it. It's in our handbook. And it's very much about the integrity of the flow of information.
People are never going to not have pain points.
No.
Ever. Like, it's human nature to struggle. It's human nature to deal with feelings of loneliness, isolation, burnout. And the need is going to be met. And I would much rather it be met in a positive way with people who care, with businesses who are wanting to really honestly do things to help people. It's going to happen anyway. I'd much rather it be with a positive influence.
There's always going to be pain and someone's always going to monetize.
That's right.
Based on it.
That's historical from the beginning of time as long as we have records.
Right. Yeah. So I've got this Huffington Post article, and for our listeners, we'll link to it in the podcast notes. But, Edward Bernays, I'm just fascinated by him, and it's not because he basically created...
Because he's the godfather.
Because he's the godfather.
The godfather PR.
It's not because he created my industry. I do have a lot of respect for him because... He had, in this article, it says how the rich and powerful really turned to him for advice. Presidents Coolidge, Wilson, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. But other well-known people, he rejected. So at our agency, we joke we have a no asshole policy.
Yeah.
And we're just not going to work with you if you don't treat people around you well. We're not going to subject ourselves or our employees to that. And it seems he was the same. He rejected as a client, he rejected Hitler.
And Franco.
And I don't know the Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza. I probably said that wrong. Do you know who that is?
I don't, but that was impressive.
I bet
how
he's
you
an
said it.
asshole.
Yeah.
I said it with confidence.
You did. You can do anything as long as you do it with confidence.
I said it with confidence.
I believed you.
But he says Hitler wanted him to create a campaign for the German train system, and it says Bernays deadpanned. Apparently he did not know that I'm Jewish. But of the father of public relations, it says, you're right. It's not the godfather. But it says in large part, the field of PR was his idea, and most of his core ideas, at the core of his beliefs, did come from his uncle, the Viennese psychiatrist Sigmund
Can you talk
Freud.
about Sigmund Freud a little bit? Because this is so not like, I got my information from The Crown. So I'm just
a lot of us do. That's fine.
I haven't watched season 3 yet. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
So anyway, the woman, there's a person on The Crown who talks about Freud and says he wasn't very nice and that he actually had some terrible practices. Is that true?
Yeah, he did a lot of coke and prescribed it for patients. When he came to America, having done all these practices, he said... Everyone was excited, like psychology, this idea of this field where we're really going to study the mind. It's going to help so many people. He was like, no, I'm bringing the plague, is what he said. Because once people become aware of their neuroticism and what's so difficult about life, at first it's going to make them miserable. But from that kind of place, he really believed that he could help the most difficult patients, is what he would have called them, the people where everybody else wrote them off as different parts of society, but the kinds of things that he did were completely unorthodox. Again, no ethics, none of that.
Right.
He was just kind of throwing things against the wall to see what would stick initially, but, brilliant. Yeah. Really did help a ton of people. We wouldn't have this as a field if it hadn't been for his work. That's what I think happens at the leading edge a lot of times, too, is you're pushing things, and it's a really difficult balance between growth and ethics all the time, I think, too. Yeah. But he's fascinating. The reason that our therapy sessions are an hour long is because that's how long it took him to smoke one cigar. That's why.
Wow.
There's no science. There's no anything behind why it should be that long. It's just how long it took him to smoke. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I just had a question for you too. Just thinking about psychology, and I know we talked about this at the beginning too, and it's applicable. I think it's very applicable in our business. Yeah. But trying to think about our clients or the people that our clients are reporting to a lot of times, helping them understand the psychology behind what we do. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about like industries or personality types or things like that are more drawn to that, or helping people understand that you first have to start with people's motivations?
That is such an interesting question. I think anybody in business needs to know something about psychology. Anybody who works with people. So I don't know everything unless you're like just doing data entry, not communicating, not talking to anyone. Because, I don't know. I just think about this with like branding or with any of the other things. Like it makes you have a feeling like people are drawn towards things or pushed away from things, but they don't necessarily know why. That's really honestly a huge contribution.
An emotion, and you don't know why.
That's right.
You just know that's what you want.
That's what I want.
That's the win, is when you, as a marketer, when it invokes an emotion that causes someone to take action.
That's right. And I think a lot of times what happens is we aren't necessarily aware of that. We could pay more attention to those things, ask the question, take the time to do that. I think that if people were more mindful about those things, about that kind of thing in business, listening, really, really listening to what that audience is asking for. What are they paying attention to? What do they tune into? Leaning more into those kind of things, like responding to the things that people already want. Right. That kind of stuff is just incredibly powerful and meaningful. And then it gives people that sense of belonging that every single human being is hardwired for and is looking for our whole lives. And it changes over time. And I think that's an important thing too, is what worked a year ago might not necessarily be the same thing that connects and resonates now. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means the culture's shifting. Yeah. Just pay attention to that. Put your fingers on the pulse. Keep tuning in. Keep having the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's great.
Especially for our clients and team members and everyone, just to think about, like you said, it changes over time, making sure that you're checking in with that and know the difference or that it's the same or whatever it might be.
So before we go into our final segment and close out, you have a podcast. Do you want to talk about it?
I do.
Where can they find it? Well, they can find it in our episode notes.
That's true. So my podcast is called the Go Podcast, and it's all about collecting stories. And so I wanted people to be able to learn about mental health, what the impact is just of stories. So how people grow up, how they process things where people have gotten stuck, and the tools that we can use to help us get out of those places. And so I just have people, I went first. So I told my story about why I got into this field and really what my childhood was like, what really shaped me into the person that I am today, and some of the tools that really helped me, and then have other people on the show to talk about that too.
Cool. Awesome. And they can find that on your website?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And what is your website?
It's terimurphy.com.
Okay.
One R.
Great.
One R.
We'll link to it too.
And we'll link to it.
Perfect.
Yes. Before we wrap up, we have a segment called The Juggle is Real. And it's where we ask our guests for feedback. Doesn't have to be advice, but just feedback in your experience with keeping it all together. Because look at, we're running a business. I have 2 kids, a puppy, a cat, a husband. Katie's got a puppy. Like, we have a lot of things going on. We all do. Everyone today, our society moves at such a pace.
Yes.
The juggle is real.
Yes.
Talk,
open. Yeah. I mean, again, like, this is a personal struggle of mine. I have 2 kids at home, husband, business, like that kind of thing as well. And then I feel the pressure, like, I'm supposed to be taking good care of myself, because I can't sit across from my clients and say, you should take care of yourself, make sure all of that's going well, like, calm down, you have time. And then I'm like, my hair's on fire. I'm like running around trying to get dinner. And
I've gotten to a point where like self-care feels really stressful.
Yeah, that's right.
Like another thing to check off a list that I don't have time for, another thing I'm failing at. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even really love that word anymore. I was talking about that with my husband today. I call it now care for myself.
I like
Even though it's exactly the same thing.
It really
doesn't feel like pressure. Because I think, so human beings learn from the release of pressure, right? That's what we actually learn from. It's not from putting pressure on, it's from when it actually releases.
Okay.
And so
that makes sense.
When we have a ton of pressure on us, like we're juggling all these responsibilities, we're going to go to the thing that releases pressure the most. So we need to make sure whatever that release is good for us, is healthy, can take care of us, is accessible, that doesn't cost $1 million every single time. Like once in a while, that's great. Having a glass of wine once in a while is great. It's when we go way into the extreme of some of those different things that it starts to become problematic, or if we don't do it at all. If we just keep the pressure on, what's going to happen is it'll just come out sideways.
So what I'm hearing is going to space once.
Going to space once. You should do it.
That is my self-care.
No, but then you're going to go to Mars. That's you.
Nothing's enough.
The moon is not okay with you.
I didn't say moon. I said space. I don't think I'm Neil Armstrong. Come on. I know my limits.
I mean, the moon is the closest thing, though. Anyway, we don't have to get into a space
I don't know a lot about space. I just want to go there.
I would say the other thing, that balance doesn't exist. And it's okay.
We say that all
That's
the
okay.
time.
You're going to have seasons where you're really focused in work.
Yeah.
You're going to have seasons where it's your marriage or your partnership or your kids or you, whatever the thing is, that's okay. Like, it's okay to have different things happen at different times. It's just, again, if it gets too much in one area, that's where you're going to start to feel the breakdown happening, or burnout or fatigue or exhaustion, or you'll physically get sick in those ways. So you've got to have a regular release.
So question for you about that then. So what are some things that are good to relieve the pressure that aren't a glass of wine every night or whatever.
I highly recommend crying. I think it's really good. I highly recommend crying. There's 6 different kind of tears that you cry. I know. It's an interesting.
I just started crying a few years ago.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I was like, oh, what is this liquid coming out?
I think I went my whole life with crying like 5 times, and then I turned like 33 and I was in therapy, and like I haven't stopped crying since.
No, it's completely true. Therapists have a way of doing that.
Yes.
But so different emotions register differently in your body. And when you cry, it literally moves the emotion up and out of you so that you can process it. And so angry tears are different chemically than sad tears or scared tears or happy tears. So that's one way to release pressure. So you will literally feel different on the other end of crying. So go alone if you need to. I love to run into the woods. I have woods right across my house. I run and cry.
I run trails and cry.
And I love running. It's also a way, like you need different activities based on what emotion you're feeling. So if you're angry, you need something high energy. If you're sad, you might need something that's a bit more soothing.
A bubble bath.
Like a bubble bath or lavender or a hug from a friend or laying down and doing Netflix. Again, like flexibility is the key.
She's not a hugger. She needs the hug.
Right. Or hugging near someone.
Yeah, like a half
Hugging your dog.
A high five into the air.
My dad has even noticed. He's like, "Yeah, you always pat me on the back really quick when you hug me." And he's like, "You're like, okay, that's enough."
That's right. And if the thing,
How Richard is. He hates hugging. My husband hates hugging.
If the thing doesn't work for you too, that's okay. Everything isn't for everyone. Like journaling isn't for everybody. Bubble baths are not for everyone. Hugging is not the thing for everyone. That's okay. And it's okay if it changes for you too.
Interesting.
Thank you so much for being here. This was super fun. What is one actionable thing that our listeners can take away from this discussion of psychology, marketing, PR? We rolled into self-care, not self-care, caring for self.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that sticks out to me, a takeaway from our conversation, is rather than starting with the goal, the tactic of what the end is supposed to be, to really start with where people are, explore, and know that that can change over time.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you both for having me. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.